Welcome to Boys in the Hood TV. Today we're going to be discussing an 8-tray Hoover criminal who will be responsible for shooting at the MOB Pirus and injuring 6 of them, while also shooting at the Rollin 40s and killing a female. On August 25th, 2006, at around 9 a.m., the 8-tray Hoover members named CB and Rollin were driving down Western Avenue. Now, standing in front of an auto parts store were members of the Rollin 40s, a man named Wilfred Atlas and Demetrix Clemens. Both stood on the sidewalk, and next to them were 2 females in a car named Wilson and Chevelle. Now, as the 8-tray Hoover members drove past in their Lincoln, Clemens from the Rollin 40s would start yelling at them and throwing up gang signs. Now, as the Hoovers continued to drive down the street, Rollin, who was driving the car, would do a U-turn in the middle of the street, then immediately head back towards the Rollin 40s. Now, as the Rollin 40 Crips stood there talking, the Hoovers would pull up and hop out. CB, Rollin, and another man were all armed. And without saying a word, they started firing. Wilson, who sat in the car with Chevelle, she would duck down under the dashboard to avoid being hit. But sadly, in the hell of gunfire, Chevelle would be struck in her head, killing her instantly as she sat in the car. Now, the Rollin 40 members, Atlas and Clemens, were both running at the time, but Clemens would be hitting his leg, causing him to fall to the ground. Now, as he attempted to crawl, the Hoovers would walk up to him about 3 to 4 feet away and shoot him 7 more times. Now, in the midst of this firing, Atlas would also be shot twice. Now, after they finally stopped shooting, the 8-tray Hoovers would jump back into their Lincoln and drive off. Now, Wilson, who was still alive inside the car, would call 911, and officers would arrive shortly after to find the chaos at the scene. Both Atlas and Clemens would survive their injuries, but sadly, Ashley Chevelle would be pronounced dead at the scene. Now, just 6 days later, on August 31st, the 8-tray Hoovers were attending a funeral for a fallen loved one. Both CB and Rollin were riding in a funeral procession through Compton on Bullets Road, which is directly in the MOB Pirus set. Now, as the Hoovers drove by an apartment building, members of MOB would start yelling at the Hoovers and flashing gang signs and taunting them. The Hoovers would continue on to the funeral and go about their day. Now, hours after the funeral was over, the 8-tray Hoovers, including Rollin and CB and 2 other Hoover members, were still upset about the MOB Pirus taunting them earlier in that day. So the 8-trays would then change clothes and put on all red to be a throw-off to the MOB Pirus. They would then decide to head over to the MOB Pirus neighborhood, but before they left, they would decide to steal a yellow Hummer. Now, at around 5 p.m., MOB Pirus members stood outside of the apartment complex. As they stood there drinking and smoking, the 8-trays would pull up in a yellow Hummer and park right in front of the driveway entrance. Now, CB and another Hoover would hop out the car, but Rollin would stay inside along with the other Hoover member in the driver's seat. And that's when CB would start blasting immediately. The MOB Pirus members all scattered in different directions to avoid being shot. Now, the 8-trays would let off over 20 shots shooting at the Pirus members. A total of 6 Pirus would be hit, and many of them would fall to the ground. Now, one of the females who laid on the ground, bleeding and injured, one of the Hoovers would walk up to her and shoot her multiple times as she continued to bleed. Now, afterwards, CB and the other Hoover member would hop back into the car and they would flee the scene. But there was a sheriff in the vicinity and they would immediately respond. Now, as the sheriff drove near the apartment complex, he would spot the yellow Hummer speeding away and it would immediately give chase. Now, as the Hummer sped through the streets of Compton, Rollin, who was the driver, would lose control of the Hummer and crash. Now, after crashing, the 8-tray Hoovers would hop out the truck and start running on foot and head to a nearby home. They would then force their way inside this home and barricade themselves inside. But not long after, the sheriff's department would arrive and they would enter the home and detain and arrest all 4 8-tray members. Now, the authorities would find a revolver, a Glock, and a SKS, and a shotgun inside the stolen Hummer. Now, not too far from this scene, the EMTs would arrive at the apartment complex where the MOB Pirus were shot. All 6 MOB Pirus members would survive their injuries. Now, detectives would run ballistics from the guns used in the shooting, and the ballistics would come back that the same Glock that was just used in that Compton shooting was also the same gun that was used to kill Ashley Chevelle just days ago. Now, 8-tray members CB and Rollin both will be charged with 1 count of first-degree murder and 9 counts of attempted murder. Now, during questioning, CB, or A-Tray, would admit to being inside the Hummer, but he would claim that he had no clue that anyone inside planned on shooting anyone because he didn't see anyone with any weapons. Now, by the time the trial came along, the LA shooting and the Compton shooting would both be tried separately. Now, the LA shooting, in which Ashley Chevelle died, Wilson, who sat in the car with Chevelle, would tell the court that she didn't see any of the shooters' faces during the time of the shooting. But another witness would take the stand and would identify both Rollin and CB as the men who were the shooters the day that Ashley Chevelle died. Now, the defense would argue that the 8 Trays had nothing to do with the shooting, but possibly the Van Ness did, or the 5 Deuce Hoovers were possibly responsible for the shooting. Now, ultimately, both Rollin and CB would be found guilty of first-degree murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. Now, only 2 years later, in 2008, the trial for their Compton shooting would take place. Now, one of the victims who were shot by the 8 Tray Hoovers would identify CB as one of the 2 men who got out of the Hummer that day and shot them. Now, with this case, there was enough evidence to tie both CB and Rollin and the other 8 Trays to this shooting. Eventually, both will be convicted of 6 counts of attempted murder. Clifton Brown, aka CB, would be sentenced to 215 years to life in prison. Casey Rollin would be sentenced to 92 years to life in prison. I would like to thank everybody for tapping in, and I'll see y'all next time.